All right, guys, so people have been asking me to start making some more long form content to be able to post on YouTube where I can go a little bit deeper into some subjects. And this is my first video that I've made this way, and I thought what better to talk about than Retatrutide, which is a triple receptor agonist compound that is the most effective compound for weight loss that exists right now. So it has outperformed both Semaglutide and Tirzepatide in the trials that have been conducted so far. And so this one is going to target 3 different pathways. And in a lot of people in the study, or at least the average that was observed during the clinical trials, they were seeing people on average losing 24% of their total body weight. And even at 48 weeks when that trial was concluded, people were still losing weight. So really what I want to look at here is how does this work? What's going to make it different? What are some of the real benefits that have with it, and then some of the risks that might be associated with it, and then kind of how is this or could this be dosed? It's still in clinical trials right now. At the time of recording, it's in phase 3 clinical trials, and I'm assuming somewhere in the next 12 to 24 months or so is when it's going to finally get that FDA approval and start coming to market then after that. So, but with what they've seen so far, this is probably the most promising compound that we've seen, and really the most well tolerated in terms of side effects that are being observed to kind of fight against obesity, fight against some of the metabolic diseases that people have, and really just give incredible results. So you could classify this kind of in the same family, I guess, as the other compounds like Semaglutide and Tirzepatide, and even things like Mazdutide and Survodutide, or even you could throw it in there with something like CagriSema. At the end of the day, it consists of a GLP-1 receptor agonist like those others do. What it is it's a weekly compound. Some people increase the frequency of that, but it's going to target different receptors in the body that are going to help with things like blood sugar regulation, appetite. But the thing that really sets it apart from Semaglutide and Tirzepatide is going to be the addition of the glucagon receptor agonist. So it is going to hit 3 different receptors. It is going to hit the GLP-1 receptor, which is going to be the same thing that Semaglutide targets. That's really going to start suppressing appetite, slowing the digestive processes, and helping some with insulin secretion. It's also going to add in the GIP receptor. And so that was what we saw introduced when they brought Tirzepatide to market, right? Think your Mounjaros and your Zepbounds. And what that's going to do is it's going to help improve insulin sensitivity. And you can even see with both of these two is some inflammation reduction as well. And then you're going to add in with Retatrutide that glucagon receptor agonist. And so that's going to help increase energy expenditure. It's going to start increasing fat oxidation. And with that, because it's targeting fat specifically and burning fat, you're also going to probably see a lot more lean muscle preservation. So kind of to recap that, Semaglutide hits 1, the GLP-1 receptor. Tirzepatide hits 2, the GLP-1 and the GIP receptor, and Retatrutide adds in that 3rd receptor agonist, which is really what started to separate itself from the other 2 with that addition. So if you kind of look at them and compare them head to head and what was observed during the trials that they went through, Retatrutide has increased weight and fat loss, better metabolic health improvements, and then even after that 48-week point, right, when you look at the other 2, they were way longer, closer to around that 70-week point. But people were continuing to get results even after that 48-week point, which is just incredible when you think about how effective this compound is. So the first thing I want to do here is kind of break down how Retatrutide itself actually works. So you're going to have a GLP-1 activation, which is where you're going to have the appetite suppression that's going to come from Retatrutide. One misconception is that Retatrutide doesn't suppress appetite, but I think what's difficult is people compare it to Semaglutide or Tirzepatide. For somebody like myself who started with Retatrutide as their first GLP-1 compound, I felt appetite suppression very quickly and very significantly. And a lot of people do experience that. But the other thing too is, especially when transitioning from other compounds, it's going to take a few weeks for it to build up in your system to the highest levels it's been yet. So it absolutely does suppress appetite, but like I said before, you're targeting other things too. And so we shouldn't focus solely on the appetite suppression when we look at how Retatrutide is working in the body. So that GLP-1 receptor is going to basically control how fast you're going to process and digest foods. It's going to make you feel fuller. And so where you might have woke up hungry every single day and you would go eat, Cheerios or Pop-Tarts, you have a lot more control because you don't feel like you have a desire or a craving to eat the food. And so I think that's really important too, because what a lot of people do is they overeat and they don't really have control over stopping that. And I think that what we need to look for is not so much appetite suppression where we don't feel hunger at all, but more so where we have control over how we feel hungry. The other thing that can come with this GLP-1 receptor agonization is going to be some of the side effects. You might feel nausea, you might have some constipation, and you might have, that slower digestive processes, which can make you, kind of have some feelings of stomach issues. A lot of that can be mitigated by using things, digestive enzymes, fiber supplements, drinking plenty of water, and also eating the right types of foods. Don't eat the greasy, bad, nasty foods. Try to focus on shaping your diet with it. So Retatrutide has that GLP-1 receptor piece that we've seen with Semaglutide and Tirzepatide. The GIP receptor piece of it is, so what that is glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide. And so when you add in the GIP piece with the GLP-1 receptor, you're going to have better insulin secretion, you're going to have increased insulin sensitivity, and you even have some better, what we think is better nutrient partitioning. And so your body might even burn more fat as opposed to muscle, or having more fat loss as opposed to muscle loss when you add that kind of combination in there with the GLP-1 receptors. But the biggest thing, kind of the thing that separates Retatrutide from the pack, is going to be the glucagon piece of it. So what glucagon typically is going to do in the body is it is going to actually raise blood sugar, which kind of seems a little bit counterintuitive when you think about how these compounds are used for things like A1C control and things like that. But when you kind of combine it into this combination with all of these other receptor agonists, what we're seeing is that it's actually increasing people's energy expenditure, right? So you're actually going to target brown fat. You're going to be burning more calories, and you're also going to start using some of that stored fat that you have in your body as fuel. And that's where you start to see some of the bigger, more kind of fat burning properties of Retatrutide. And one thing I think that, a lot of people use some of the GLPs, and by the time they finish using it or they get to their goal, they say, hey, I'm skinny fat. Like, I lost all of my muscle in addition to these. Well, one, you undereat, you're not weight training, and you're doing these things, but also you're not really targeting as selectively the fat piece of what you're losing. And also what's happening is you're losing muscle along with it, which can happen in a caloric deficit. But what we want to really try to do is preserve muscle as much as possible, ideally build it. And so as you start using that stored fat for fuel, you can actually, what's really interesting with this is, especially with the reduction of visceral fat, is as we're losing with Retatrutide, we might not see the metabolic rate drop as significantly as we would when people undereat with something like Semaglutide, lose a bunch of weight, and their body starts adapting to those processes. So what we're seeing when we add all three of these in here together, you're going to be less hungry, have less cravings for some of those bad foods. You're going to have better insulin sensitivity. You're going to do better at targeting and burning fat and breaking that down in the body. You're going to have an increased metabolic rate, and then some properties where we're preserving and kind of protecting against muscle waste. And so when you think about all those things added in together, that's really why we're seeing that Retatrutide is producing such incredible results when it comes to weight loss, and then also just having better body composition results by the end of the clinical trials that we're observing. One thing I like to reference is the phase 2 clinical trial data that you can find in the New England Journal of Medicine that was published back in 2023. And so they had participants that were receiving somewhere in the range of, some people were in the 1 milligram per week range. Some people started at 2 milligrams and titrated up. Some people started at 4 milligrams. And there was variances in what they did, right? You can look at that data and see kind of where it was. You'll see an ID number, which is the initial dose number, and then you'll see what they went to, which is the number that's defined in there. And so the people who went up to 12 milligrams per week, they were losing on average 24.2% of their total body weight over those 48 weeks. I think one thing that's really key to look at is when you look at the people who went up to 8 milligrams per week, they still lost, I believe the number was about 23 point something percent. And so you maybe lost 1 extra percent by going up 4 milligrams in the dosage. And so I think the sweet spot that kind of exists for Retatrutide is somewhere in the 4 to 8 milligram per week range. It doesn't have to go that high, but I think that's the highest that's really necessary to go to. So when you compare that to the other GLPs, it's more than Semaglutide, which is about 15-ish%. It's more than tirzepatide, which was around 20-ish%. And then the biggest thing of it too is it was a shorter period of time, right? I've already mentioned 48 weeks, but people were still losing weight as they got to that 48-week point. So they weren't plateauing at 48 weeks. They were actually still losing in a shorter period of time that was observed from the other compounds. So what you're going to get from this is you're going to get a lot of metabolic benefits out of it. So your fasting glucose levels, your insulin, those are going to have had a reduction. HbA1c was decreasing in people that were observed during the studies. Their insulin sensitivity was improving. One thing that I think is amazing with this is I believe the number was that there was like an 86% reduction in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And so their fatty liver, all of the markers were going down. Cholesterol, triglycerides, those numbers were getting better. And then people's blood pressure was improving. So you weren't just seeing that people were losing weight and looking better, but everything in their body was actually performing way better than it was before introducing this compound. So I kind of mentioned it before, but anytime that you lose weight, outside of using anabolic compounds or something that's really going to help build, preserve, and even in those cases, you still probably are, you are going to lose some amount of lean muscle tissue. You really see that if people are not resistance training, they're not eating enough protein, and they're under eating and putting themselves in extreme caloric deficits. But the one thing with retatrutide that we kind of already mentioned, when it activates that glucagon receptor, the amount of muscle that people are losing has decreased in comparison to the others. And so, they use DEXA scans as a part of these processes, and you can actually see that the kind of fat to lean muscle tissue loss that people were seeing was actually better with retatrutide than it was with something like semaglutide. So yes, retatrutide can be more muscle preserving than semaglutide would be, but it still matters. It is a tool, right? Not a miracle, although it could be considered pretty close to a miracle. But you have to do proper training, and I don't care what type it is. Get exercising, do things that can help build lean muscle tissue. It doesn't have to be bodybuilding, it doesn't have to be CrossFit, it can be Pilates, it can be yoga. Something that is pushing your muscles to strengthen themselves in some capacity. Intake plenty of protein, drink plenty of water, and also get really, really good sleep. Your sleep can affect the process as well. So retatrutide is going to make all of the process a lot easier, but you still have to give some type of input on your end if you want to come out on the output side of things in a better position. So we kind of talked about it earlier with some different side effects that might be observed, but retatrutide still has the GLP-1 receptor agonist in it. It still has the other things in it that semaglutide and tirzepatide have in it. So you might experience nausea, you might experience diarrhea, constipation, bloating, fatigue. All of those things can happen. You may even have vomiting and things like that, right? Headaches, whatever it might be, injection site reactions. But I will say that on average, or what it seems like with people, is that they observe those in retatrutide users or patients less than they're observing them with semaglutide, right? One complaint that people have, and even they notice it when they switch from semaglutide to tirzepatide, is that the nausea and the fatigue and all of the horrible side effects they got when it came to slowing of gastric emptying has improved, right? And even when you look at retatrutide, it even happens more so where they don't feel the nausea. People are like, I have my energy again. All of those things that were horrible weren't so horrible with retatrutide. I will say the one thing that I probably see the most is the skin sensitivity piece of it. A lot of people, it feels like a sunburn, or it feels like your feet are tingling, or not feet are tingling, but it feels like when your leg falls asleep, right? Your skin just feels super sensitive to the touch. And, like almost like you have a sunburn when you put your shirt on. That will go away over time a lot of times for people. And a lot of people say when they increase their water intake, they increase their electrolyte intake, they can kind of mitigate some of that skin sensitivity side effects. The other thing that we have to address, and a lot of people freak out with, is the heart rate increase. And I always say that if you're going to talk about the heart rate increase with retatrutide, you have to acknowledge the heart rate increase with semaglutide and tirzepatide, because it is observed with people who take both of those as well. So yes, retatrutide can increase heart rate. A lot of it that's observed, cardiac arrhythmias, things like that, are observed in the short term. Over time, that's going to go away and kind of resolve itself. And it also seems to be that people who start low, even starting at 0.5, 1 milligrams per week and slowly increasing over time to get to that kind of 2 milligram per week amount, are going to mitigate that over people who start high at 2, increase to 4 quickly, or start at 4. So, and the other thing too, outside of kind of some of those like things like nausea and everything that I just mentioned, is that you still can have muscle loss when it comes to retatrutide. And we've kind of already talked about what's going to contribute to that to more and how to mitigate that. But retatrutide is going to mitigate that more than the others. If we look at the ways that dosing could be done with this, and we're kind of looking at how the other ones are done, I would say probably the most common thing that exists is some type of schedule where it would be increased every 4 weeks. 1 or 2 milligrams a week to start, after 4 weeks, or I would say no sooner than 4 weeks, increasing from 1 to 2 or from 2 to 4, then increasing from 4 to 6, and then 6 to 8, and then 8 to 10, and then 10 to 12. What I think is even better than doing it every 4 weeks is going to be increasing once you have been in a stall and you are not getting the desired results for at least 4 weeks. The reason being is that you can be in a stall for 1, 2, 3 weeks and come out of that stall, right? Are you making sure that everything else is in check, or are you just relying on the compound to cause you to lose weight? Right? And weight loss isn't linear. I've had weeks where I've gained a pound, I've gained 2 pounds, I lost it the next week. And the process is going to change over time, especially for women. When you have monthly hormonal fluctuations, your body can go up in weight. And so you have a period of time where you might not be losing. So what I think is even better is checking and making sure that it's been weeks since you've lost. You've checked your nutrition, you've checked your training, you've checked your sleep, you've checked all of those other things that are important to contribute to weight loss before you decide to increase. I also think that avoiding an increase as long as possible and not going up every 4 weeks is important, one, from cost savings perspective, but two, just because it might not be necessary, and kind of for some of the reasons I've mentioned before. The other piece of it is if you use something called GLP-1 plotter, what you can see is that it's going to take about 4 weeks for something to build up in your system over time to the highest levels it's been in your system. And so why do we increase at 4 weeks when it's finally getting to those highest amounts that it's been thus far since we've used the compound? And so it doesn't really make sense to increase at 4 weeks as it starts to get to that higher amount. I would say that really the minimum should be something more like 6 weeks, in my opinion, would be better than increasing around that 4 week point. However, most of these things are something that is increased around 4. Some people kind of experience that they don't really feel anything around that 2 milligram a week range, and it really starts to kick in and hit when they get to that 4 milligram a week range. That's where they start to feel more appetite suppression, but it absolutely can suppress appetite at the lower amounts. I've seen people using 0.5 milligrams per week and having plenty of appetite suppression and losing plenty of weight. It just is going to depend on individual response. So what are some things that we could look at when using retatrutide to assess how is this working in the body? How are we seeing results with this? I would say check your HbA1c, right? Look at your A1c, see if that's coming down. Check your AST and ALT, see how your liver health is improving. Check things like LDL, HDL, triglycerides. Look at how those have changed over the course of this. And even look at things like body composition. Don't just rely on the scale. Also rely on how you look in the mirror, or even a scan giving you results and showing this is how much fat you've lost, this is how much muscle you've lost, and seeing how your body composition changes over time. So the last thing here, kind of giving an overview of kind of what the benefits are of retatrutide, how it's so great, how it's so effective in comparison to the others, and kind of some of the risks with it as well as the dosages. But, retatrutide is just kind of a whole new class of its own because it starts to target some things that the other ones weren't when it comes to how we're losing and what we're losing versus just the ability to lose. So it's a triple receptor agonist. It's going to have a GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon receptor portion of it to really just give total benefits to help with appetite suppression, improving insulin sensitivity, and increasing the fat burning that we're seeing with patients, all in a once-a-week shot. So based off the studies we've seen, you're going to have more fat loss than any other ones that are out there. The other ones will help with liver and cardiovascular health, but retatrutide seems to be more powerful for that. We're going to preserve lean muscle mass, and we are going to change really how we approach the problem of food and obesity moving forward by using compounds like this. So once it gets out of these clinical trials and some of the skepticism goes away from retatrutide, I think this will be the newest craze, and it will be what everybody wants to get their hands on. So my goal is to continue to talk about different peptides and do some more content like this. At some point, do some things like Q&As. But if this is something that you're interested in learning about and want to get a little more information than I typically have when it comes to things like my TikTok, and some of the short form and some of the Q&As that I do there. Hit the subscribe button, drop a comment, and give me some ideas about things you might want to see in the future. And if you're using anything like Retatrutide or any of the other peptides or GLPs, let me know how your experiences have been, because I love to see that, and I love to use that to kind of tell a story as opposed to just my experiences and my opinion. I think when you can see others, that's really critical to telling the story and understanding the benefits of things. So thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you guys on the next one.